I've heard a couple quicks.
Just had a late lunch, so it's 6:30. Just put a bunch of snack stuff back.
I bought you that cord. I like it. Great job.
All right, and it's a notice of the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you. It's hard. Yeah. Bye. You're welcome.
Go ahead, but I guess we can bypass the call to order and roll call on the Pledge of Allegiance.
No, we don't have to.
And we'll get on with the regular agenda. The first one is approval of the Planning and Zoning minutes dated June 12th, 2033. Any thoughts, questions? I have a motion?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So now,
That's
you got the floor.
And Matt, may I just say one thing? Please, all of you, if you could speak into your microphones. I know it's a little kind of wonky at times, but my concern is what we've picked up and making sure
Yeah.
that everything gets recorded. I know Matt will do a good job on that, but just remember, lean ahead. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Good to be back before you to talk about the general plan. I only have about a 45-minute presentation for you, so
downsized that to 4
Only
minutes.
45 minutes, is that what you said, or 4 to 5?
I will.
This is important information, everybody.
No, I enjoy the camaraderie we have, and so hopefully everyone understands that is tongue-in-cheek in that we do have some hopefully informative updates for you, but it is a little adjustment to the overall general plan schedule, so we'll talk a little bit about that, and hence why we won't be maybe having such a more deep conversation this evening, because we're kind of setting ourselves up for that September meeting that Stacy was discussing for the previous meeting. So last time we were before you talking about the general plan was back in June. Since that time, some obviously work efforts for the general plan overall has conducted. And so my discussion comments are going to focus on kind of 3 primary areas this evening, and then I'll close with next steps, which will have some detailed timelines and dates for Commissioner Burns. I know that is of importance. And so we will go through these, and I'll pause at certain points to obviously offer opportunity for conversation, but if there's any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. One of the status updates that I'll first discuss is showing just where we are in the process to make sure everyone's understanding of the overall work effort and where we are in the timeline. We're also going to talk a little bit about the website accessibility and how that plays into the timeline. From there, we'll get into the key issues or feedback areas based off of the outreach that we've received to date. So now that we've gone through the majority of our primary scheduled outreach efforts, I want to just give you some high-level results from that so that, again, you're in a position for our meeting in September. From there, we'll then close on a discussion about the general plan structure. The key takeaway that I want to add before I move on is there's no request for direction this evening. Again, this evening's about giving you a foundation of knowledge of what the work effort has been done up to this point, so you have an opportunity to share any input with us of this is information I would like to know or I'd like you to go look at, so that when you come back before us that we have the information available to you or provided it to you in advance so that you feel prepared to give proper feedback. So the way we're approaching this is overall at this point in the process we're anticipating that we would be closer to having a complete draft of the plan. But because of public engagement and some of that effort, we've had to extend some of the comment periods for some of our previous meetings. And so naturally, we have to kind of wait for those periods to close until we can kind of put a bow on it and start writing. And so That's where tonight we want to give you some information so that you feel like you can ask the proper questions. So in advance of the meeting next month, where we are going to ask you for feedback and specific opinions, that you'll hopefully feel that you had the proper time to look over the material and to give your feedback. Questions, comments? Okay. So I know this graphic is old and we've seen it many times, so all I want to share is, for everyone's benefit, is that we're getting that little yellow arrow is trekking along our process, and we're basically getting closer to that 60-day review period that I keep harping on at the end of that enrich phase. So that 60-day review period starts October and goes through November. So that's why that September meeting is going to be important. We're going to be asking you at that meeting, we're going to bring forward the draft goals, policies, and actions, which is really the crux of the plan, right? And we're going to zero in on some components of those draft goals, policies, and actions to get your input on, do you think this aligns with your thoughts and what you've heard from your conversations? And so that is why we wanted to stitch in that additional meeting, is to give you the proper time to look over the material rather than try and press the issue without giving you the ability to review the material and be more comfortable with your formulating your opinions. Questions on timeline? Yes, Mr. Byrne.
I was under the impression that we were going to get a draft at the beginning of September, and we were going to be discussing the draft on September 12th. Is that still correct, or are you now telling me that September 12th is going to be more data collection on your part, and then we'll get the draft later?
A good point of clarification. So because, if I move to the next slide, we've accomplished 4 community workshops up to this point. Those workshops, as we heard from the public about more opportunities to get people engaged, residents were assisting us in getting the word out, and so we tried to keep all the virtual workshops as open as long as possible. You can see from this slide that workshops 1, 2, and 3, the virtual component closed at the end of July. We then had our community workshop number 4, which is I think many, if not majority of you, attended that open space community workshop number 4. So that virtual workshop is still open on the project website through August. And so that change in terms of keeping the virtual workshops open through July, and now this open space one open through August, tweaked our ability. We can't really write the plan until we close those workshops, so that we're not cutting any ability for residents to give feedback. So that original timeline had to shift slightly in order for us to accommodate some of these moving parts of the overall schedule. So in order to try and ensure that feedback that you're speaking to, is why this September meeting, we want to give the bulk of the writing that we possibly can have there, but it's not going to be the entire plan. It will be the goals and the policies associated with those goals, and then the actions that we're suggesting to help implement the plan. Because really, at the end of the day, those are the components that are going to be used to formulate decisions, and also are the points that we've asked the public to comment on the most in terms of the guts of the plan, if you will. It comes down to the goals and policies of the plan. So from those goals and policies and actions, we'll have a conversation in September. Your feedback will then allow us to button up the plan by the end of that month for the formal 60-day review process, which then we all look at for the next 2 months.
Peter, could you speak into the microphone? Thank you.
To be clear then, the draft is not going to come before us. A final draft is not going to come before us.
a final draft of the 60-day review plan in its complete version will not come before the 60-day review process.
Okay.
But Matt, will it come, I mean, it will be, we have an October meeting, so it is
Yes,
something that.
we'll
we
be
can-
reviewing it with the commission, just as that's what the 60-day review period's for, is to review
Will,
for that.
will we then review the draft as it's published? Will we review it?
Absolutely, yes,
And that will be in the October meeting, or?
correct.
Okay.
So we have, yes, so during the 60-day review period, we will have a workshop both with Planning Commission and Council to go over any additional comments on the total draft, just as we're taking comments from the public. That's pretty much what the 2-month period is for. And so that's where we will calibrate any revisions. But majority of the plan will focus and be a component of the goals and policies, as I mentioned.
And when will we get any paper before September 12th?
And that's, I will touch on that on the next step slide at the last slide of the presentation.
But given the timing, there has to be a draft by October 1, or you don't have a 60-day review period.
Right, so the problem that we have is we wanted to have discussion with the Planning Commission, right? But we have also the challenges of trying to get and leave public comment open as much as possible. But also, for the meeting in September, we have to get the content out to the Planning Commission, right, in advance of the meeting so you can review it. So we're gonna get it out to you in 1 week in advance. You can imagine with that, we also have to have a draft to staff a week in advance of that. And so everything starts to back up that we just can't, we don't physically have enough time to close all the outreach, write the whole plan, and get it to staff basically in a week. In order.
Would it make more sense for us to delay the P and Z September 12th meeting to something more like the 21st, or I'm just asking, so that we have something, so that staff can review it, we can review it at something closer to what's going to be going out?
My recommendation, but you have every ability to change that, obviously, is the guiding direction of the general plan are the goals, policies, and actions. Everything else in the general plan is background information to justify those goals, policies, and actions. If we were to push it to the end of September for Planning Commission comment to see the whole document, we would have little opportunity to turn around and incorporate that in time for the 60-day review. So we wanted to get the bulk and most important component of the plan to the commission so that we could then get your input and then get that into the 60-day review draft.
I think that's a really important point.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I understand, I understand what I think the intent was initially, but again, just trying to respond to the public and adding meetings and things like that, and trying to, again, be sure that we cover all that we can. It's you know, the schedule needs to shift.
So all great comments and ones that I anticipated for these adjustments. As general plans are drafted and we, as Stacy pointed out, as we accommodate those variations, we have to make adjustments, right? And so that's unfortunately, because we have the overall state statute and ratification election set in stone, there's little ability for us, because we work back from that time frame, to push back the 60-day review. Otherwise, we would just push everything back, right? However, after that 60-day review, everything really starts to stay on a more rigid timeline that we will not be able to adjust. So up to that point, that's why we wanted to give the opportunity for the commission to, like you said, review something before you're then in a public setting asked to comment on it. And so these are kind of the best way that we could balance all of those moving parts. So one of the things I wanted to bring everyone's attention to is this at least abbreviated summary of the 4 workshops that we've held up to date. As we're talking, and if you were viewing the slide, you probably get the gist of what we kind of wanted to convey here is a reminder of some of how the progression built on itself. We started with visioning and mapping, and then refined the vision statement, talked about community trends, and assessed the goals. Once we understood the goals that residents were keying into, we then looked at the goals and the policies associated with those goals to even dive deeper. And then at the instruction of council, we also looked at the general plan structure. And then from there, getting into the open space workshop where state land attended and gave their comments to inform the process. And so with that, you can kind of see how the in-person and virtual attendance is progressing. And so as we discussed with council in this similar presentation, we're always looking for more opportunities to get out in front of residents. And I think based off our last conversation with council, there is support to, during the 60-day review, to look at having more pop-up opportunities like we conducted previously at minimum at the post office to, again, make residents aware that the draft is available. So before I move on, if there's any specific questions about the outreach overall and recommendations or suggestions, I can pause now.
Matt, just a quick
Yes.
question. Level of participation, is it consistent with other work that you do? What percentage of the population actually participated?
Yes, good question in terms of that's always something that I think is of, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but these numbers that we're seeing in terms of participation are still higher than we would experience even in larger communities. We're conducting 3 other general plan updates at this time. All of those general plans are for communities considerably larger than Carefree. And I would say only one of them has had more participation than Carefree has in even given their populations. So we're always looking for opportunities to inform residents. What we also like to remind those that look at some of the hard numbers is that we strongly believe, and I would almost go as far as to say I know, that some of these numbers in each workshop, while it might be one individual or one couple, there's 10 or more neighbors or residents behind those individuals that not necessarily are their representatives, but that Carefree is a very interconnected community. And so when a certain number of residents participate, that tends to disseminate even to a wider web of residents. So I feel that if we had the luxury of spending, I'll just be blunt, sometimes you want to balance the cost benefit of spending more money on outreach, right? Are you going to get more comments? What I would argue is I don't know that we're going to get different comments, that we might get more comments, but I feel very comfortable that of the residents that have participated, that we've identified what the concerns are. And so within that context, I think we're in a good place to prepare a good draft of the plan. Then once that draft is out, then hopefully more residents will come to the table and understand what the big picture looks like and maybe even have more thoughtful input.
Thank you.
So within the context of those outreach efforts, we really came down to 5 primary topic areas that, or themes, if you will, that had the most repetitive comments. So this by no means, not even close to all the comments that we've received, but when we look at the totality of comments, the ones that had the most repetitive are those topics that you see on the screen, and then the sub-bullets under those are generalizing the primary points that were of feedback within those. So again, they're not quotes from any specific one comment. It's more generalizing a group of comments around one train of thought or comment. So, so within the open space conversation, preserving the 48-acre trust land for passive recreation, we all know was a topic that we heard a lot about. And so that's still a parcel that is of focus within our drafting efforts. Through the open space meeting, the notion of recognizing what is most preferred within that 48-acre is that passive component. Through that open space workshop, we learned from resident feedback that the expectation that that 48 acres is viewed more as hiking trails, ramadas, benches, things like that that would be more passive in nature and not active recreation, sport courts, those types of things. So that was, I think, a good takeaway from the open space meeting, is to be able to dive a little deeper into those particulars. We also heard a lot about prefer to natural and passive areas, but see structured active open space in select conditions. So when, yes,
Just one comment on the preserving the land.
yes.
Should at some point the cost of preserving that land and of maintaining it also be considered?
So, Commissioner, that's a great comment in terms of the 48 acres, and one that I and our team share with residents when we have the opportunity, is that the general plan is just that, right? It's general in nature. And so I don't want to suggest that the general plan can do certain things that it cannot. And so some of the things that we're hearing from residents, the general plan may not go to that level. So as you pointed out in terms of the 48 acres, there is very much an agreement amongst all residents that we need to do an analysis on this to understand if it even were to be purchased in some fashion, what the cost would be to maintain it, and some of the other factors that go into that. So our explanation as we talk with residents is having goals and policies that might speak to the incremental nature of how you get to that step in the process. So the general plan would not have the analysis of how much that would cost. The general plan would say that it's a desire to preserve additional open space in the community. And then we'd have some policies to support that notion. And then an action might be, in order to do that, it's recommended that you do X, Y, and Z steps. You do an analysis of the cost. You form a committee to review that and to assess other open space in the community to even determine, is that the best parcel? What other vacant pieces? We've heard from residents to say, we want a comprehensive analysis of other parcels in the community that could support open space or different types of open space. And so those are all the things that unfortunately a general plan is not going to have the ability to answer, and so you document that within the plan to show the commitment and the suggested steps.
On that point, the state land department was pretty straightforward in saying that state statute require a minimum zoning of 1 home per acre.
Correct.
The general plan and the zoning map of Carefree says 1 home per 2 acres.
Correct.
So when you go to publish your land use map for this, is it even an option to designate it as open? I'm just asking.
You are tracking in the right direction in terms of I think of a comment and question that we would present to the commission at that September meeting.
So, is it even permissible
And that's,
to label it, or even consider? I'm not saying we would or we wouldn't. I'm just saying,
is it even possible to,
even possible
Yes.
to label it as open?
so, that is the dynamic here, is state statute says we must work with state land. State statute says that you cannot, as you pointed out, just dedicate state land to open space. You must at minimum preserve that one dwelling unit to an acre. And so you arrive at a very thoughtful approach of, okay, well, if our open space designation right now says that our open space allows for one dwelling unit to an acre, then would it be appropriate to identify that parcel as open space rather than as residential as it is now? What I can say you is state land department would come back and oppose that. But there is no requirement that says the town cannot propose that and move forward with that at or in opposition to what the state land department prefers. So the long answer to your question is that there's
Whatever you want.
the legally we have to make sure that there's one dwelling unit to an acre. There is not any specific requirement to have that one dwelling unit to an acre be applied through a residential land use classification or an open space classification. So that is a very good example of something that we would bring to the commission and council's attention, and make a collective recommendation as to whether we would want to move forward in a certain fashion, and then during the 60-day review, we're required to notice state land of here's the draft, and then state land has the ability to comment on that draft, and then the process would move forward from there. What I've seen in my experience is state land will provide a comment letter, and if they feel adamant, they would attend the adoption process and make their comments further known. But again, it would be still up to the discretion of the town to decide how the town would want to move forward within that capacity, as long as we contain that one dwelling unit to an acre.
So you could color it as open space, but still show it as on a zoning map as
So
general plan. You could color it as open space.
I will say the majority of general plans that you find across the state, if the community only has one open space designation, one green color on their land use plan, I would venture to guess it's a extremely high probability that the description of that open space allows for up to one dwelling unit to an acre for that sheer reason of state land.
One more question. How, with all of the discussion of the Carefree 50, as the state land department
Yes.
refers to it,
Good memory?
how much definition is added? You said passive recreation, and then you said trails, ramadas, et cetera, et cetera. Have the proponents of that articulated that that's what they're looking for? Or
If I follow the question, we approached in our open space community workshop, we wanted to identify what the view of that particular parcel, the ultimate use of that parcel would be, and the majority of feedback up to this point, although technically we may get more, is a more passive recreational character to that 50 or 48 acre parcel. Then there has not been wide support for any more active recreation on that parcel. But that's where that second bullet point is. There was a lot of asterisks in residents' comments that, hey, we're not opposed to active recreational uses, and in some areas we may need active recreation, but you got to find the right parcel for the particular use. And so it was the old adage of that it may be appropriate considering, you know, the conditions, which we kind of recognize overall.
Just one thing that I heard in the table talk that was going on during that was, people were talking about a dog park.
We did have some comments about a dog park. Again, I haven't tabulated all the online comments from the virtual workshop, but I am unaware of the majority of the comments that we've heard that were supporting a dog park within that 48 acres. But we'll have to kind of wait and see until the comments come back comprehensively. I would say anecdotally, I don't know that the general plan would necessarily get into that level of specifics, but I'd be surprised that there would be support for such a use on that particular site.
Matt, can I ask a question?
Sure.
With state land and coloring the map green, and can you have different types of open space designations under land use? Like one could be it would be open space allowing residential versus open space not allowing residential?
So Stacy tracks on another type of comment that we would be exactly the type that we would be bringing before you at the September meeting. Is right now we have one open space designation, as we all know, but it does lump in very, I would say, different types of open space. It even includes cemetery in that open space. Obviously, we've heard a lot of residents talk about private golf courses in that open space. And so that is, I think, something that we are seeing as a potential positive recommendation, is to further refine the open space types, possibly up to 3, minimum 2, to help further clarify. If we can commit a parcel to being conservation, then we should do that, and not just lump everything with a 1 dwelling unit to an acre when we know it's even legally under the ownership committed to conservation, for example. And there are some of those pieces right now in the community. And so Stacy is spot on that that would be a potential consideration, is breaking open space out so that we can better refine what types and where. So one of the other things I'll just, again, I don't want to go through every bullet point, but I would pause on that last bullet point of the open space, is that be proactive, more specific language with action statements, less wishy-washy statements. And so I put quotes on that because that was one specific phrase that was provided, and I think it kind of summarizes what a lot of other residents were saying in different ways. And that's, as we know, the general plan speaks in shoulds and shalls or encourage. And when it comes to open space, we've heard a lot from residents that are especially passionate about open space that we have more committed language. And so I think that's also the other more art form of the writing process, is to take some of our existing goals and policies and see how we can recraft those to be more committed to, the town will work to support the preservation of open space. It will look to acquire open space. That might, we start talking about it will acquire open space, but how it goes about it. So those types of words of will and shalls, I think you're going to see more of in those draft goals and policies. And that's where I could see conversation from commission and council of, are we in a position to commit to that? And I don't know if I'm willing to go that far, and I'd want to see this step done in order to say that statement. And so those are the types of things that we would be interested to hear from you come that September meeting. So the other thing is the town fiscal responsibility and economic development. We've heard a lot from the residents about the importance of the town being fiscally responsible. And so there, I think, is, in addition to open space, that fiscal responsibility and economic development will have some I think, enhanced presence within this draft of the general plan, simply to help further clarify what the intent of the town is moving forward. We heard in our last council meeting that the town is, working within their draft of the 24-month economic development plan. And so I think it will be obviously very important that the general plan acknowledges the nuances that the town is either contemplating or residents are anticipating, and make sure that the long-range plan, aligns with short-term recommendations. And so we've heard from residents those bullet points within that economic development conversation of focusing on developing the northeast corner of Carefree Highway. Now, again, these comments are just captured. We're not saying that they're, whether they're consistent with the overall recommendations of the plan, but we did hear from residents that there's concern on that northwest corner of Carefree Highway and Tom Darlington, and that special planning area. So there are areas within economic development that I think the plan is going to need to address in order to appropriately satisfy resident concerns, as well as to cleanly identify where the town is in terms of moving forward. Water was certainly a comment that residents shared, and I think we all understand the importance of that, and state statute requires the general plan to address that, so that will continue to be a component. The semi-rural character is while it's later in this list, it is one of the top components of why residents live within Carefree. So you see some of the nuances within that topic. It's not just about the low density, but some residents were looking at building heights and light pollution within that. We also heard through our open space meeting the notion of view sheds and protection of view corridors. So that's kind of a component of that. And then also traffic congestion is a topic in various forms that we've discussed in previous meetings as well. Lower speeds and enforcement is comments. So some residents want to see lower speeds, but they also recognize that might be accomplished through enforcement and not through other means. We heard positive and negative comments about roundabouts. Same with positive and negative comments about one lane through the town center. And then also a desire for more improved sidewalks and parking in the town center. So if there's any specific comments or preferences of when you come back, Matt, I would really like to have this level of understanding, or want to make sure that we cover something, I'm all ears. But those 5 areas are areas that you can anticipate that we would have certain goals, policies, or actions up for conversation in more detail.
To that point, we talked about in the past collecting information on water supply, and I know that all those statistics are going to be part of the background. But I really do believe, and I advocated before, that we ought to have a hearing like we had on open space or a workshop on water, just so that everybody gets on the same level with this.
And we are,
I'll
Sorry.
be done in a second. I really do believe whatever that background information that you're collecting from the water company, that you ought to get that out as soon as you can, just so that people have time to process that. Because I don't want to find out at this meeting on September 12th that, oh gee, our water is 10% short. Okay, now I don't expect that that's going to happen, but that's going to change the whole dynamics. So I would just like to encourage you in the strongest possible terms to collect your background information on water and get it out not only to the commission and to the council, but also to the public, so that we know, we understand what the playing field is. Are we playing in a baseball diamond or a football field?
Yeah, couldn't agree more that that information is obviously important to being able to comment on water in an educated way. So we are as diligently as possible working with the water company to get that data, and we certainly will share it with the commission as early as possible.
Can I add one more comment, not on water, but with relation to open space and view sheds? I think that our zoning laws here, I don't know what the breakdown is of particular zoning classes, but all of our zoning classes have maximum disturbance areas and maximum building envelopes. Well, maybe not so much building envelopes, but disturbance areas. And I don't think that people, especially when you're talking view sheds, completely understand that when you look up, one of the parcels we had today was way up on Grapevine between Galloway Wash and Grapevine, I guess it's
It was, yeah,
Grapevine
Cibola,
and-
off Grapevine.
right, way back up there. I mean, that area, that subdivision is built out, essentially. There's that view shed, I mean, yes, there's homes on it, but the preponderance of all of that dirt up there is going to remain undisturbed. And I think that the town, especially when we're talking preserve a semi-rural environment, they don't appreciate how little of a lot can truly be disturbed away from the natural desert. I'd just like a couple of paragraphs or something in there that gives, I mean, we're not going wall to wall, and there's no place in Carefree except maybe down in the town center that that's going to ever happen. So if you would do some throwaways on that, just in terms of background, I think that would be appreciated, because it allows people to understand that we are not going to be subdivisions like you see down in the valley, where you know, there are people concerned about the Carefree 50, that it was going to be bladed, put up lot walls, and build from lot line to lot line. And that's never going to happen here.
Yeah, I think if I follow your recommendation, suggestion, concern, all of the above, is agree that we heard view sheds are or should be a consideration process. But what was interesting as we heard more about that topic, you know, we prepared the Town of Paradise Valley's general plan, and view sheds were of critical importance within that community. And one of the nuances that, you know, we learn something new in every plan we do, is in that community, I think most would think of a view shed as from eye level, right? I'm down, looking up at Camelback Mountain, for example. But in town of Paradise Valley, view sheds were actually viewed in two ways. I'm hillside looking down, as well as valley floor looking up. And so I think that might be tracking. I mean, I understand your disturbance comment and that you can't build from one lot line to the next lot line. I agree that that's something that we would want to capture in our words in the general plan, but we'd also want to capture in the general plan that view sheds need to be considered from different vantage points. We're not simply just saying, well, I'm down here looking up there, so you on the mountain should protect what I'm looking at. They also have the ability to look down on you, and like you said, you're not going to blade that whole lot, so now I see a postage stamp. So those are the dynamics of the considerations that we're taking in as we're drafting those components on that particular topic.
Where do we stand in this? I mean, we're still discussing and getting ourselves ready for information now for the September 12th meeting to begin. I mean, so what else are we accomplishing here this evening?
So the last topic that I wanted to just go over is if you remember in the early part of this process, we brought the discussion to the commission about the structure of the general plan. And we had discussed the two kind of primary approaches. One, that we would preserve the current structure of the plan, which in essence utilizes the required elements as chapters of the plan. And that was generally the preferred direction at that time. Council, through the conversation, identified a preference to bring that same conversation to the public. And so that discussion we brought forward to them in our community workshop number 3. So another example of why we had to kind of adjust the timeline. We were anticipating we were going to be drafting the plan, but we're still waiting for that feedback on, okay, what's going to be the actual organization of the plan. But we did get feedback at that community workshop number 3, and 70% of the respondents favored a theme approach. And these 3 themes, although just drafted suggestions at the time for conversation, were actually supported in terms of being themes that capture the primary areas of focus within the community. So you can see there kind of focusing on the scenic community character, the open space and environmental component, and the prosperity and fiscal stability. So based off of that feedback, we are moving forward with drafting the plan as a theme approach. And when we say that theme approach, oh, that's interesting. So we have some animation here. Within that theme approach, we have our typical introduction that I think we've shown to you before, and I think everyone understands the components behind that, and it sets the vision and the themes up. And then from there, we would get into theme 1, which within that, we still had some residents that liked the notion of elements, and that when I'm talking about open space, I know where to go. I go look for open space. So we, within this approach, we're going to try and work on a hybrid that we have the theme of scenic community character, but within that, we'll have discussions on land use and growth and circulation. But then we'll have goals and policies for that chapter, not broken out by those specific elements. We'll have discussions, but then we'll have a grouping of goals and policies for that chapter. Then we'll get to the next theme, open space, environmental stewardship. We'll talk about open space, we'll talk about environmental, we'll talk about water resources. Then we'll have goals and policies associated with those, and so on through prosperity and fiscal stability. The overall takeaway, though, is once we have all those goals, we'll have one chart that shows all the goals together and how they all are interconnected and relate to the different elements of the plan. So that's what the whole bread and butter of this theme approach is, to show how a goal is not just dedicated to open space. It actually, if achieved, will accomplish a lot of different elements of the general plan, not just open space. It might also accomplish environmental. It might also even accomplish economic development, depending on the situation. So that was the specific takeaway that I wanted to express this evening, is that we're trying to, make everybody happy, is that we have a theme approach, but we're still going to have those element components.
Would it be possible in this hybrid then to have an index where you would look in the index and see element 2 is addressed on page 3, 4, and 5?
That's a fantastic comment that we've incorporated into a general plan that we're completing currently, is that we prepared the general plan as a theme approach, obviously different themes, larger community, so even more themes. But as we got through that, the residents also shared that I still would love a kind of choose your own adventure of a table that says, open space, what goals is that addressed? And that was right up front in the executive summary. So we know that residents' attention span from a general plan that might be 100+ pages wants to get to the crux of the issue in some ways. And so that might be a very good suggestion for our executive summary, is to break out some of those key topics that we heard from residents and tell them right away, go here, here, and here for some of the key ones, and then here's some secondary ones that also apply. So with that, I would just jump into the last slide, Chair. So this gives the detail of what I was conveying, that we'll be working towards getting a draft of those goals, policies, and actions so that they can be pushed out to the council and commission on or by 8/29. That obviously gives a week before the council meeting, which just by order is coming before the P&Z commission meeting, but it will in essence give the commission more time to review the same material. And so then at that 9/12 meeting, we would have, I hope and expect, longer and more robust dialogue on the content shared and walk you through some of the areas that we would want your focus on, but then obviously be open to any comments that you may have. And so from that 9/12, we then finalize the 60-day review draft, as you can see, from 9/12 to 10/1, in order to then be prepared for that 60-day review period. We do have a community workshop, number 5, scheduled for October 11th, and then I think within that we would just work with Stacy to identify what the workshops are for planning and council. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair, or commissioners, for any final questions.
Well, it's quite obvious you put a lot of detail into this, so it'll be the next couple months will be quite interesting, to say the least. Encourage everyone to get online and go through the nonsense and throw in some comments if necessary. Got any announcements?
No, I was wondering if maybe open to the public, if there's anybody that has any comments or questions that are in the audience? No? Well, thank you for coming. No announcements.
Okay, well, do I have a motion for adjournment? No motion. Second? Everybody in favor say it.
You've been seconding it all along.
Good night, folks.
Thank you. Thanks, Mick.
Y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're totally educated again.